Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Sean Godar, Vice President of Strategy and Analytics at Employers Health and Co-Director of Right Direction. I will serve as the moderator for this event. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. Please send any questions you have using the question function in your control panel. We look forward to addressing your questions at the end of the presentation. If you ever have any difficulties hearing me or hearing the speaker, please raise your hand in the control panel and we will be in touch to assist. Finally, there's a handout section in your control panel where you can download materials related to today's presentations. Upon exiting the webinar, you will receive a survey to provide feedback. We appreciate all attendee feedback in order to provide future valuable education opportunities for upcoming events. We will also send out a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording event and its accompanying handout. Submit your questions anytime in the chat function, and we will answer those during the Q&A session. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Darcy Grudadaro, Director of the American Psychiatric Association Foundation's Center for Workplace Mental Health and Co-Director of Right Direction.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be here, and thank you all for joining us today. This is a really important topic, talking about depression, a clinical perspective, and the impact on the workplace. So we're just delighted to be able to really drill in today on a clinical perspective. So I'll start out by just saying Right Direction is a partnership between the American Psychiatric Association Foundation Center for Workplace Mental Health and Employers Health. So we bring the workplace and clinical perspective, and Employers Health brings the purchaser perspective and the employer perspective. So it's been a great partnership in developing high impact resources for employers and employees that help to better understand the impact of depression and the importance of seeking help. It's really important to get help early when it's needed. Right now, clearly with the pandemic, we are in the midst of a really concerning and second wave related to mental health. The rates of depression and anxiety symptoms have more than tripled in 2020 when compared with rates in 2029. The US Census has been collecting data from March through July, and then they started again in August, and they're going through October. So we are just seeing really rising rates of depression and anxiety and concerning rates, and employers are paying more and more attention and making this a high priority. Also, the Journal of the American Medical Association last week put out an opinion piece that really focused on the fact that with the second wave is building, and what we're seeing in that is rising rates of mental health and substance use disorders. So it's real, and depression and anxiety are at the top of that list. So this is really important that we have this discussion now with a clinician to really talk about how the workplace is being impacted by depression for not only employees that are working remotely, but also those that are essential workers and healthcare workers that are on the front lines. And really, we are hearing more and more from employers recognizing mental health as a high priority and working in kind of three broad areas. First is raising awareness, educating the workforce about depression and other mental health issues, and addressing stigma, because we know stigma can really stand in the way of people getting help when they need it. So it can be a barrier to people reaching out and getting help when they may be experiencing depression. And then, of course, creating a mentally healthy culture, because the more employers can create a mentally healthy culture, the more people feel psychologically safe reaching out for help when they need it. And then, of course, the third area is really improving access to care, because we can do a great job in raising awareness. We can do a great job at creating a mentally healthy culture, but if we don't have the services and supports people need, we've undermined the work that we've done in the other areas. So it's really essential that we focus on how do we really improve access to care. I did want to just highlight on the Right Direction site, which we relaunched in May, we have resources for not just employers, but also employees too. So if you're an employer, sharing the Right Direction website at rightdirectionforme.com, it's a great way for your employees to get information they need so they feel like they're not alone. So we have things for employees like the signs and symptoms, choosing the right provider, finding community support at organizations like NAMI and Mental Health America and Families for Depression Awareness. There is support out there in the community. It doesn't all have to come from an employer. Also, the cognitive effects of depression, which we're going to hear more about today from our expert presenter. And then for employers, ideas around raising awareness, building healthy organizational cultures, again, so people feel psychologically safe seeking help. Improving access to care, which, as I mentioned, is really essential because once people come forward, we really want to make sure they get the help they need when they need it. And there's much more on the website, so we really strongly encourage you to visit. Also, the series of virtual town halls we've held this year since May that have been extremely well attended with really high caliber speakers, those are all available on the website as well, so feel free to come and visit. But also, I just want to introduce our presenter today. Dr. Michael Chustek is a board-certified psychiatrist. He's an APA, American Psychiatric Association Distinguished Fellow. Dr. Chustek has worked with employers in a consultative role, and he has a private practice with individuals, and he's been a medical director of a national practice. So he is bringing a unique and multifaceted view to his discussion today about the clinical aspects of depression and the impact on the workplace. So I'll let you take it away, Dr. Chustek.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that and all the work you've done. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. The topic of today's presentation is about depression, and specifically depression in the workplace. My name is Michael Chustek, and I'm a psychiatrist with a particular interest in creating healthier workplace environments. I wanted to say a special thank you to the team at the Center for Workplace Mental Health for helping to arrange this presentation. And I wanted to thank all the attendees for joining today. So below is the overview of today's presentation. The topic of depression, and specifically depression in the workplace, is so big that I'm going to give a broad overview of many of the topics related to depression in the workplace. By the end of the session, I would like attendees to be able to recognize some of the symptoms of depression. I would also like for attendees to be able to better recognize depression symptoms in a colleague. I will also speak about how depression affects the workplace and why it is so important for organizations to address depression in the workplace. I will also speak about what organizations can do to support employees with depression. At the end of the presentation, I will speak about how one can access help for themselves, or if they see signs of depression in a colleague, what they can do to support and encourage that colleague. I'll go to the next slide, which is basically the introduction to depression. When we speak about depression, the statistics can be mind-boggling. 1 in 5 Americans experience depression in their lifetime, and globally, more than 264 million people suffer from depression. Depression can affect an individual's home life as well as work life. Depression can be one of America's costliest conditions. It is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. In one study, it was shown that employees at a high risk for depression had the highest healthcare costs after 3 years of initial risk assessment. Depression can affect anyone. Just open up the newspaper and you will likely see an article on depression and someone dealing with depression. Depression can also lead to other medical issues, including heart conditions and diabetes. Depression can also lead to unhealthy lifestyle choices, which can further propagate that depression and lead to other medical issues. For instance, someone might start drinking more alcohol or smoking more, or not even taking their medications properly, which could lead to worsening medical issues and further propagate that depression. Depression can also lead to strained relationships with others, leading to conflicts. One of the most important points of this presentation is to know that depression is treatable. When we see individuals coming for treatment, we see individuals doing phenomenally better when they receive treatment for depression. Next slide. So in one study, 71% of individuals reported at least one symptom of stress, for instance, headache or feeling overwhelmed or anxious. 72% of people with stress report that stress interferes with their own lives, at least moderately. Employees say that stress and anxiety affects their performance, their relationship with coworkers, the quality of their work, and the relationship with their superiors. As you can see, depression can have such a wide range of implications. Next slide. At this time, I wanted to share a sample case. This is a made-up case which pulls many of the symptoms that a typical individual may experience if they are dealing with some type of depressive symptom. Gary is a 47-year-old male. He's a successful CEO of a technology company overseeing a team of 30 direct report employees. The job is quite stressful and has started taking a toll on Gary's overall health. He finds himself having a beer each night to deal with the stress. He has also started gaining weight, especially because he has been grabbing meals wherever he can. For example, he would often order takeout food and sometimes get meals at vending machines. He just doesn't have time to prepare healthy meals. He has trouble sleeping at night and often wakes up exhausted, and his days always seem to start off on the wrong foot. He fights frequently with his significant other, and he reports he's completely stressed and overwhelmed. Again, this was a made-up case, but it is something that we see quite often. People with depressive symptoms who start to adjust their lifestyle, which further fuel unhealthy living and increasing depressive symptoms. It becomes a vicious cycle where the depressive symptoms lead to lifestyle choices that create worsening depressive symptoms, leading to worsening lifestyle choices. It becomes a downward spiral, which grows quite quickly. Next slide. So the following slide represents some of the hallmark symptoms of depression. The symptoms of depression can fluctuate. Some people can have some of the symptoms listed or all of the symptoms listed. Individuals who may be experiencing depression may feel little interest or pleasure in doing things that they used to enjoy. People are not as interested in doing things they once enjoyed, and they become apathetic. They feel down or depressed or hopeless, feeling that there's no hope for them. Sometimes what we have noticed in taking care of individuals with depression is that they can almost have tunnel vision, like blinders to the possibility of alternatives, so they only see one way out. Other symptoms include difficulty with sleeping, having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep throughout the night, or the opposite, sleeping too much. It can go both ways. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, but very often we see people with poor sleep, not sleeping well, they're exhausted, and you can see how this propagates upon itself because they're so tired that they're not sleeping great, and the next day they're exhausted, and it impacts other areas of their lives. Sometimes we actually see people who self-medicate so they can get to sleep. You can see people start taking sleeping pills or even drinking alcohol to get themselves to sleep. And what winds up happening is that this has a carryover effect. They may be groggy the next day. Also, alcohol and some of these sleep aids produce poor quality sleep. Furthermore, these individuals may actually not be treating the underlying cause for the poor sleep, which is the depression. And if they had worked on addressing the depression and lifestyle strategies, they may actually have better sleep. Oftentimes we see people feeling tired and having little energy. They feel like they are drained of all energy. Appetite can be poor, or sometimes you see people eating too much. You might see weight loss or weight gain. It really can go both ways. This is actually another symptom where it can cause a spiral of depression. For example, those that are not eating well, who are losing weight, will likely not be getting the vital nutrients they need on a daily basis. They may start to feel weaker. They may have less energy, which makes them feel poorly and can contribute to worsening depression. Conversely, those that might be eating more and gaining weight may actually start to not feel good about themselves, and this can fuel the depression as well. Sometimes we see individuals doing what many call emotional eating to suppress the feelings they have related to the depression. I actually recently saw a woman who was 100 pounds overweight, and she had significant medical issues related to her weight. She actually used to eat at night when everyone went to sleep to avoid the emotional toll that her stressors had caused her. And her stressors were that of her medical issues, financial issues, and relationships with strained relationships with her family. She recognized that eating, while it helped her feel good in the moment, was contributory to many of the stressors that were causing her depression. We worked on addressing her thought patterns related to her depression and helped her to develop a concrete plan to address her stressors. Going back to the symptoms, people can often feel badly about themselves. They can feel like they're a failure, or they let themselves or family down in some way. Other times, individuals with depression can have trouble concentrating on things. They may be watching TV and not fully present. Or they may even be having a conversation with someone and realize that they haven't even been fully present in the conversation. They can be significantly distracted. Another symptom of depression is moving or speaking so slowly that other people have noticed. And yet another symptom could be thoughts that one would be better off dead, or hurting themselves in one way. They feel like they have no other options. This should never be the case, because there's always solutions to problems. But unfortunately, individuals who are feeling significantly depressed can have those blinders on and tunnel vision and only see one way out. They often don't see alternatives, solutions that are out there. When someone goes for treatment, they can work on these symptoms and work on seeing things a bit more clearly. Treatment has been shown to be incredibly effective. Depression can be analogous to feeling lost in the forest. Remember those movies where someone is lost in the forest and they look around the forest and they only see layers upon layers of trees all around, and it is impossible to tell which way to go. Someone with depression is experiencing that. They are lost in that forest. And going for treatment and getting help is like having someone in a helicopter fly over the forest who sees things from a different perspective, helping that person find the route that gets them out of that forest. Sometimes we just need a way to have a different perspective of what's going on. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share another example of a case, this time seeing the effects of depression in the workplace. Mary works for a small insurance company. She has noticed that her coworker, Greg, hasn't been himself lately. Greg has been coming in late to work. Also, Greg seems more distracted than usual, and it seems like he has always something on his mind. He has also begun missing days from work, which isn't like him. Greg sometimes looks like he hasn't been taking care of himself as well and seems to have lost a bit of weight. Mary isn't sure what she should do for Greg. Next slide, please. So when someone is depressed, the effects of the symptoms can impact all areas of that individual's life. When an individual goes to work, they may be able to cover up some of the hallmark symptoms of depression. But depression has a way of creeping into other areas, and it can be difficult, if not impossible, for someone with depression to cover it up completely. In the workplace setting, depression can manifest itself in the following ways. Below is a list of the symptoms that individuals may demonstrate if they are feeling depressed. Among the symptoms listed include poor concentration and decreased productivity. Individuals are distracted and can have trouble focusing. There's a concept called presenteeism, which basically means that the person shows up for work, but they are not fully engaged and they don't work to their full capacity. As you can see, there are many additional problems that arise when an individual comes to work depressed. The symptoms can impact the individual, the team, and the organization. If you notice that a colleague seems more preoccupied than usual, or that he or she is coming into work late, or missing more days than usual, or getting into conflicts with others more frequently, or that work performance seems to be dropping, then it may signify that there's something more going on. Next slide, please. So I wanted to take a moment to reflect on just why the population has been seeing an increase in depressive symptoms. It has been widely documented that rates of anxiety and depression are increasing. There are so many theories as to why this is occurring. One of the theories is that there are more stressors that individuals are facing lately. Every day, one can look in the newspaper and see some article related to stress, anxiety, and depression. But what are some of the prevailing notions as to why we are experiencing higher rates of these conditions? Well, below is a list that contains stressors that are impacting everyone in some way or another, and I wanted to take some time to review them. First off, the coronavirus pandemic has contributed significantly to increasing rates of anxiety and depression. There have been numerous studies that suggest the next pandemic that we will face will be the significantly increasing rates of depression and anxiety due to the coronavirus pandemic. This has been due to so many factors related to the virus. First, the devastating losses resulting from the virus, the sadness of losing loved ones and not being able to go to the hospital to see and be there for loved ones. I actually work in a nursing home and have seen this firsthand, and it's quite devastating. Also, the fear of contracting the virus. For workers that have to go into work or for people who have to leave the home, even just to pick up groceries, there's a fear of contracting the virus or bringing the virus home. There's also the effects of social isolation, not being able to see loved ones or get together for milestones and events. The isolation increases the anxiety and depression. There's also the economic fallout from the effects of the virus. So many people are unemployed, and the uncertainty of how things will go add to the anxiety. You know, one of the major factors of anxiety is uncertainty mixed with fear. This is a recipe for anxiety. Adding to all of this is the political climate. It's hard not to turn on the TV and see some issue related to the upcoming election. Working from home brings its own challenges, including isolation, feeling disconnected, and the difficulty delineating between work and home life. Employees can report having difficulty unwinding from work since the lines between their home lives and their work lives have become blurred. This brings me to the next point, information overload. There's no shortage of news feeds out there and so many inputs where you can get information. Sometimes it's just too much. We were not designed to be taking in so many inputs. Furthermore, a lot of the news cycle is negative, and it can create this effect of ongoing negative input. I also included another stressor called the sandwich generation. A lot of sandwich generation describes the group of individuals who are taking care of their children, but at the same time taking care of their parents. And that's another generation that is noted to have increasing rates of anxiety and depression. Social media is another cause of anxiety and depression. Social media is designed to keep you engaged on the platform for as long as they can keep you on it. But it has so many negative consequences, including feeling like missing out. You know, it's widely demonstrated that people often post only the good things, and you can have this fear of missing out, and that contributes to anxiety and depression. But with all of this extra stress, there's been an increase in the awareness of mental health and so many things that we can do to help address the stress. For instance, finding alternative ways to get together, being outdoors, or through video calling to help keep connections, or by limiting our time spent watching the news can be so helpful. Next slide, please. So the previous slide demonstrated some of the reasons society is experiencing higher rates of depression and anxiety. There are some factors that are more specific to the workplace that I wanted to speak about that are also contributory to anxiety and depression. I wanted to take a quick moment to discuss these factors that occur within the workplace that may lead employees to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and depressed. These things include chronic work overload, poor leadership management styles, poor employee fit, unclear or unrealistic goals, poor resources or tools to achieve those goals, lack of communication, promotion of toxic workplace environments, and poor work-life balance. For organizations, meaning managers and leaders, it is so helpful for you to take a 360-degree view of the organization to see what's working and what's not working. Also, analyzing factors that might be contributing to employee anxiety and overwork. It is so important that organizations take a hard look at themselves, their cultures, and the employee morale to see what, if any, changes need to be made. These changes can definitely help with employee stress and anxiety. Next slide, please. So now that we know more about the symptoms of depression and now we know more emphasis is being placed on awareness of depression and its implications, how come more people aren't speaking up out at work? Below is a list of some of the challenges associated with seeking help in the workplace. Employees often do not want to speak up because of the fear and stigma that is associated with depression. They may fear being negatively judged, and they may fear their job security. So many people with depression will just try to work through it, and they will come to work without speaking up. But the irony is that they can exhibit some of the symptoms we just discussed in the previous slides, like decreased job performance, conflicts at work, which can then impact their job performance and security. Another factor impacting people speaking up is that organizations tend to address problems when they arise, rather than on focusing on the problem in preventing the problem from happening in the first place. This is actually typical of some types of human behavior where people focus on solving the problems rather than working on the prevention. Sometimes it's difficult to place energy and resources on prevention if you can't actually see the problem. But as numerous studies have shown, prevention strategies have a far greater impact than waiting for the problem to appear and addressing the problem when it arises. There really is truth to the proverb, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, which basically means it's easier to stop something from happening in the first place rather than repair the damage after it has happened. But even still, another issue is that many employers don't have the tools needed to address depression. They may not have the knowledge of what depression is, the symptoms, or even what to do if they see depression in the workplace. Many managers have reported that they wouldn't even know what to do, even if they saw an individual with depression. The issues presented above create barriers and challenges to employees speaking up and sharing their concerns. Next slide, please. I'm going to just go to, thank you. And the previous slides really spoke about the symptoms of depression and how it affects the workplace. You can see that by addressing the issues of depression in the workplace, you would have significantly better results in so many different areas. Employees who are happier and less stressed are good for the organization on so many levels. And I'll let you take a look at some of the things that make the benefits of addressing depression in the workplace. Healthy workers lead to lower healthcare costs, which is good for the individual as well as the organization. In addition to lower healthcare costs, healthy employees are more productive and more engaged. They lead to better team cohesion and are more likely to stay with the organization. Next slide, please. So there are many things employees who are experiencing depression can do to get help they may need to begin treating the depression. Creating a healthy foundation, meaning working on addressing the problems that might be contributory to worsening depression. I will speak more about this in the next slide, but the most important thing is to acknowledge the problem and reach out for help. Don't try to do it alone. There are so many resources available, including speaking to your supervisor, human resources, friend, colleague, community leaders, or even the EAP, Employee Assistance Program. It's interesting, but there's so many people that actually don't know what an EAP is, or even if their organization offers one. Essentially, an EAP, or an Employee Assistance Program, is an additional benefit some organizations offer their employees that provide free counseling to employees. Usually, there's a specific number of sessions that are free, and if additional counseling is needed, then the EAP will refer that individual to additional treatment that continues through that person's health insurance plan. The EAP can help with stress, anxiety, wellness, depression, and even financial stressors. It can be a valuable resource. Check with your employer to see if they offer this benefit. Discuss with your primary care doctor. Your primary care doctor can also be a great resource, as your doctor often sees people coming to the office with some type of anxiety or depression or some symptom that is an indirect result of that anxiety and depression. They can also help refer you to a provider. Speaking to someone such as a counselor, therapist, psychologist, and psychiatrist can be enormously helpful. And again, it's all about reaching out. And nowadays, a lot of what's being offered is through telemedicine, or sometimes it's called telepsychiatry or telehealth. And it makes it so much easier now. You can actually see a behavioral health clinician from your smartphone or computer over a secure video conference line. And you can do all of this without ever leaving your home. Smartphone apps can also be helpful. There's something called like the Calm app and Headspace, and they're available, which can help provide guidance to treating stress and anxiety. Some of them have been shown to be quite effective, but ideally you should speak with your doctor first to see what approach might be best. Remember, depression is treatable. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a quick moment to touch upon some of the general principles when it comes to managing depression. The management of depression could have been a presentation unto itself, since depression may manifest itself differently to different people. But I wanted to highlight some key points here that are so important, I felt it was necessary to share. One of the most important aspects of treating depression is starting with a healthy foundation, the basic building blocks in taking care of oneself. This means eating healthy, exercising regularly, and getting sufficient sleep. These are the basic tenets of healthy living, and one that we all know, but so many of us actually slip in these areas since we're constantly working to meet the demands of our daily lives. So we might go to sleep later, or not do the exercise, or not eat healthy, just because we're so exhausted. Furthermore, the importance of reducing or eliminating unhealthy habits such as smoking, drinking alcohol, or using illicit drugs. Oftentimes, people are using these vices as a means to self-medicate and treat the symptoms, but not the underlying issues that are causing them to get to this point. Identifying precipitants is also key in seeing where the possible inciting factors are leading to the depression. Practicing stress management strategies is something that we all must learn. Everyone is different, and what works for one person may not work for the other. But things like relaxation training, mindfulness, breathing exercise have all been shown to be of benefit. But there are other things too, something as simple as just getting out in nature and going for a walk, or just journaling can have incredible rejuvenative effects. The key is finding what works for you and sticking with it. There are many articles, books, and videos on the topic, and finding what works for you is important in integrating into your daily stress management routine. Working on maladaptive or unhealthy thinking styles is another area that's important to address in treating the depression. We often see the world through our own set of filters, our vantage point, our viewpoint, which color the world for us. Sometimes these filters aren't working for us, or are just unhealthy ways of seeing things. And sometimes they can even lead to depression. Working with a trained therapist can help you identify some of the ways in which we see the world, our coping styles, and our personalities as just a sampling of the ways in which we can work on ourselves. Speaking to a trained mental health professional can help you work on these things. Sometimes, though, creating a healthier foundation and working on our thinking patterns is just not enough. And sometimes we can get into a loop of thinking that cannot be broken. Sometimes medications such as an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication is needed. Or sometimes evaluating our medical issues, like our blood work and other medical conditions, can be important in making sure that there are no medical causes for our symptoms. Again, working with a trained behavioral health clinician can help identify these scenarios. But again, the take-home point is this, depression is treatable, and it is so important to get that help when needed. Some other things specific to the workplace and somewhat at home include working on time management, organization skills, conflict resolution training, and working on work-life balance can also help in building a stronger foundation in dealing with stress, anxiety, and depression. Next slide, please. So, what can organizations do to help? First and foremost, increasing the awareness and education around depression. Creating mentally healthy workplace cultures should be a priority. Give employees the opportunity to participate in decisions about situations that contribute to stress in the workplace. Offer managers and frontline employees training on stress, depression, and communication. Also, normalizing the discussion of mental health by being open and communicating regularly. A lot of the literature shows that just the discussion alone about mental health goes so far. Educational sessions really do help reduce the stigma and improve the awareness. You should encourage staff to seek help from qualified mental health professionals. Also, for organizations to create a culture of wellness, making mental health a priority and recognizing that taking care of employees' mental and physical health is integral in creating a healthy, productive, and successful workplace culture. For example, things like offering seminars and workshops that offer education about improving mental health and stress management can be so helpful. Also, another example is allowing employees to have mental self-assessment tools available, or even offering free or subsidized screening from a mental health professional can be helpful. Organizations can also reach out to their health insurance plans to see what resources their health insurance plans may be able to offer when it comes to wellness initiatives. You know, one organization I worked with that was developing a wellness program, we actually worked in conjunction with the health insurance company and learned that the organization was actually entitled to several $1,000s worth of educational stipend money from the health insurance company to help develop and build a wellness program. This money was then used to create incentives for employees to take better care of their health. Organizations should make sure that they are placing energy and resources in creating these types of workplace wellness programs. These programs can help identify those at risk and connect them with treatment, and put in place supports to help employees reduce and manage mental health better. Managers and leaders should encourage open communication with their employees. There should be a culture of openness, and employees should feel comfortable sharing their concerns with their superiors. Managers should be checking in with their employees regularly, even just to say, how are you doing? If you're a manager, you want to make sure you're checking in with your direct reports on a regular basis, just to see how they are doing. Organizations should place emphasis on training leaders on mental health and the benefits in addressing mental health. And there's so much that the workplacementalhealth.org provides. That's another great, tremendous resource. Next slide, please. So in summary, depression is common. We are seeing increasing rates of depression and anxiety, especially due to the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Depression in the workplace can have additional negative effects, both on the employee as well as the employer. Depression can affect individuals at home and in the workplace. When a depressed individual goes to work, they are often not working to the best of their ability. They may be present at work, but not engaged with the work, and they are far less productive than they could be. Remember, again, depression is treatable. There are so many different ways to treat depression, and the most important part of correcting the effects of depression is just to reach out for assistance. Organizations can play a huge role in identifying individuals who are depressed and also link them up with the right supports. By working on different strategies to address mental health in the workplace, an organization can improve the lives of their employees and also improve the outcomes of the organization. It really is a win-win situation. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I put some resources that might be helpful. Feel free to copy down the information. Many of the sites have a section on it where you can find a therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist. Other recommendations include going on the website of your health insurance plan. On their website, there should be a section where you can find behavioral health professionals, like a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And remember, the EAP, your own organization's employee assistance program, may be able to help. Next slide, please. Thank you so much again for taking the time to attend this presentation. I've actually included my contact information here. If you have any questions, if there's anywhere I can direct you to, I'd be happy to help. I also wanted to thank the organization again for helping to set this presentation up. And I truly, truly appreciate all the attendees for taking the time to join in this presentation. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We really appreciate the time you spent and your great advice and insights. Now we'd like to first thank the generous support from our funders, Takeda, and Lundbeck, who have made Right Direction possible. Next slide, please. Before we get to the questions, I'd offer to share our next town hall. So please join us for our next virtual town hall on Tuesday, November 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern to learn about a brand new program called Notice, Talk, Act at Work. This program supports people managers in the mental health and well-being of all employees. Notice, Talk, Act at Work is a dynamic and interactive e-learning module that features practical scenarios, skill checks, and a rich array of resources on topics of most interest to employers, and much more. Several links for materials discussed in the talk are posted on the chat, and at this time we will begin answering audience questions. So Dr. Chustek, our first question is, do you think workplace-based services such as peer support groups are appropriate? Or should these services only be referred out or provided confidentially?
That's a great question. I actually think it is great. I think it's a great supplement to the outside resources, and it really depends on the individual's comfort level. But when done well, I do believe the peer support groups are enormously helpful, and everybody benefits differently from different things. And so some individuals may not want to seek outside counseling or go to any outside provider. And so having that peer support group in-house is great for individuals that are comfortable with that. And so I think that's tremendously amazing to have that if your organization has that. I actually know one organization that set that up in motion after a tragedy, and it was enormously helpful, enormously. And the people felt comfortable in that setting, and knowing that within that setting it was confidential, but they were all coworkers, and they just kept it to themselves. But some people, though, may not necessarily feel comfortable with that type of modality, and they may feel more comfortable going outside. But just having that option available is tremendous, and I think that's amazing that if your organization offers that or can offer that, I think it's amazing. So I feel like the more supports that are out there, the better, because you'll wind up catching those people that might feel comfortable in that type of setting. So definitely think it's amazing.
Great, thank you. Another question we have received is, would you be able to provide some suggestions on how an employer or manager would begin the discussion with an employee concerning symptoms, but have not been self-disclosed?
And what was that, Sean, that was self-disclosed, did you say?
Correct. So if someone, for example, had been presenting symptoms that you, or signs that you recognize might be indicative of something going on in their life that might be a mental health condition, but they haven't really disclosed it, what are some of the things you could do if you're a manager or a colleague? Yeah,
so everything goes back to the beginning, the prevention, the sort of the beginning stages of just having a culture of openness, making sure the organization, the individuals within the organization feel comfortable sharing and talking and discussing things. It starts that early on, because you want to make sure that individuals within the organization feel comfortable sharing concerns. Some organizations are not like that, so it becomes much more challenging when someone has an issue, because they may be afraid to speak up. And so anything you do at that point might be met with some challenges, because the organization on a whole is not set up with that culture of openness. Having said that, though, the question was more related to in the present moment. If you see someone experiencing the symptoms of depression, and again, I think it depends on one's comfort level. Like if you're a manager or colleague, and if you feel comfortable going up to the individual, depending upon the relationship you have with your coworker and the comfort level that you yourself have, it is it can be enormously helpful just to reach out and just to ask, how are you doing? How are things going? I know a lot of people often reach out when you need something from a colleague, or when there's a work-related issue, or you're sending work, but very few times do colleagues and managers actually reach out and just to check in, touch base, and say, how are you doing? How are things going? Do you have everything you need? That sort of the open-ended one, you can kind of bring it a little bit more specific, again, depending upon one's comfort level. If you notice that things are different with that individual, you might even call it out, saying, I noticed that you've been coming in late to work a lot more often, or you've been missing days, or you haven't seemed like yourself as much. Is everything okay? And again, the key is doing all of this in a non-judgmental fashion, and one with compassion. And you again, but it all starts with early on. You want to make sure that that's how you are all the time, so that way you're compassionate, you're looking out for your employees, so that way it's met with equal compassion and open and honesty, and so that way they can feel comfortable speaking up. But having said that, though, if you yourself are noticing it, but you may not necessarily feel, if you don't feel comfortable, or the relationship with that coworker is not such that it would be appropriate for you to reach out and ask in that manner, then you could reach out to maybe your superior, or even human resources, just to kind of put it out there that you're noticing a change. But again, I encourage organizations to have that openness and transparency and honesty, so that way it's so much easier to just look out for one another. That's the hallmark. But I think just checking in. And last point on that, I think now more than ever, it's so important to be checking in with your colleagues just to see how they're doing, just because of this whole time period, the coronavirus time period. So much stress is going on. Everybody's experiencing it. It's pervasive. And people, especially working from home, feeling isolated, disconnected, you almost don't feel part of that team anymore. So just checking in and, how are things going? And it could be enormously helpful.
Great, thank you. One question we have is related kind of to this new normal of working remotely. In your opinion, what are some of the best coping skills you could recommend for people with depression, or maybe just people who are really stressed out while they're stuck at home?
Yeah, also a great question. I mean, the pandemic has really upended just all of our working lives. And, it's interesting, speaking firsthand, at some points during the coronavirus time period, we weren't allowed into some of the facilities that we were able to go into, because they went on lockdown, and we were allowed to do things through telehealth, and we did a lot through at home and virtual. And it's a different experience, just being at home, sitting in front of a computer for several hours each day and trying to interact. And you really lose that dynamic. And there's so many new problems that come from it, such as that blurriness between work and home life. It's like you're constantly at work and your home life. There's no separation between that. And that could lead to a lot of stress and anxiety. And there's so many strategies that one can employ to help those that are working from home. And those things include making sure that you set boundaries where your work is at. So if it's possible, setting up a workspace just where your work is at. Not always super possible to create a specific, not everyone has access to a home office or anything like that, but even just part of the desk where that's where you do your work, and other areas of the home is where you decompress and rest and relax. And ideally, having that work space in a different location than where you sleep, because sometimes what winds up happening is having your home office where you sleep can really blur the lines between work and decompressing and being able to get a good night's sleep. But having said that, that's not always possible. So one has to be sort of novel into how they condition their home to make sure that there's that separation. So that's the physical side of it, but also the taking care of oneself. And again, it all goes back to that foundation that we spoke about on one of the slides earlier, where it's making sure that you're being proactive in eating healthy, getting exercise, and getting sufficient sleep. Those are so important, because without those basic building blocks, it's almost impossible to manage stress if you haven't been sleeping that great, or you're not eating that great, or you're not exercising. And so all those stress management strategies like time management and organization skills and all of that sort of stuff kind of falls by the wayside because the foundation, the basic building blocks are not there. So first and foremost is getting set on that, and it really analyzing those components. So like, eating healthy may mean being more proactive on things to eat healthier, to making sure you're simulating the style in which you would eat when you're at work, and maybe limiting unhealthy snacks and taking care of yourself in that respect. Also exercising, make sure that you are getting outside every day, or if you can, or even indoors doing some type of exercise to get movement, because sitting at a desk all day and staring at a computer screen can be really problematic just for so many reasons. So making sure you're setting time aside to do that exercise. Sleep, there's so many strategies for sleep, and you could just go online and look up healthy sleep strategies, which basically means going to sleep the same time each night, waking up the same time each morning, putting down your phone before you go to sleep, limiting those distractions, and having a wind down period before you go to sleep. So important. Again, those are the building blocks. And then also removing the things that are unhealthy, like unhealthy vices like smoking or drinking alcohol to excess, or even at all. And those things that create sort of sabotage ourselves to take care of ourselves, so important now more than ever. And then lastly is actually two more things, because this is such a big topic. I'm trying to squeeze all of this in just that, in the question, in the time frame. So I apologize if there's so much, but is connectedness, is making sure that you're being proactive to reach out to your network, to make sure that you're not doing anything in isolation. It's really imperative that with this whole social isolation, people being at home and not being able to socialize, and all our gatherings have been canceled, you have to be proactive and somewhat think outside the box in terms of trying to get connected to people. And it's so important, because you never want to sort of slip into isolation, because that's where we usually see problems happening. And so that, and last but not least is stress management strategies, is finding what works for you. Everybody has their own thing that brings them. So some sort of relaxation, but healthy, not like some people say they go out smoking, and that's the unhealthy, but some type of thing that brings them joy. Like even for some people, it might be like listening to music or getting outside, going for a nature walk. And you actually have to be proactive in scheduling that time in to make sure you're incorporating that each and every day. Because otherwise, if you don't do these things, then it's very easy to slip into more anxiety, more stress, depression. That's one of the reasons we're seeing increasing rates of anxiety and depression, just one of the reasons.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for maybe two more questions. The first question is, how do you engage young people to have conversations on mental health, and specifically, how can young people How can you make young people feel interested in mental health and not make it look so gloomy?
Yeah, great question. Great question as well. And I kind of think of this almost like organizations. It really starts from up top, leadership. Like in organizations, normalizing and speaking about mental health and just kind of educating on that front actually helps reduce the stigma, increases awareness, and normalizes things. But in the question that you asked, it's more general. Like, how do you make younger people feel more interested in mental health? But again, it's education, and really is important on who's providing that education. I think nowadays, there's so much more emphasis that's being placed on emotional well-being and mental health. I even see it in some of the schools, the elementary schools and junior high schools and high schools, focusing a lot of emphasis on mental health awareness and taking care of one another and empathy. And I really think that society is recognizing the importance of mental health. And I really think that by doing so and bringing it out and having people talk about it, normalizing it, and having leaders out there, people that have a high following, talking about it, has such a tremendous benefit for the younger generation, because they're starting to see that, there shouldn't be a stigma associated with that. It's actually okay not to be okay. And so I think that's great. I think we just need a lot more of that. And I think society needs to be normalizing it a lot more and providing a lot more education related to it.
Great. And I think the last question is, what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of a shorter work week as a key preventative measure for mental health conditions?
So it's a great question. So yeah, that's great. And obviously shorter work week seems like it, but I would want to make sure that we're not losing sight of the focus that would be the be it end all, because I think there's so much more behind mental health and mental wellness that's important. Because you might have a shorter work week and say, oh wow, everyone should be less stressed because now we're only going 4 days a week and have a 3-day weekend. But I feel like without knowledge of the all the aspects of mental health, taking care of oneself, removing unhealthy coping styles, removing unhealthy lifestyle choices, and just mental wellness in general, that's really the core of it. All these other things might produce a good result in the short run, but without the basic building blocks and the understanding of mental health, that might just be sort of a band-aid fix. So like we might go to a 4-day work week and everyone's super happy, like, oh great, we're working 4 days, but we might be working more hours during those time periods, or we may feel more stressed because we have to get more done in less amount of time, or we might not necessarily have built built the interactions, the conflict resolution skills, so we might still have the same conflicts at work. So again, it all goes back to the basic building blocks. But yeah, anything that could help would be great. So it seems like in a way that would be potentially helpful, but again, I would encourage people to focus more on the overall healthy living, taking care of one's mental health as the basic primer before, as most important. I hope that answered that question, but that's a great question though. I like it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom and insights today. We greatly appreciate it. Yeah,
thank you, and thank you all for setting this up and taking the time to
Bye.